The day they laughed at her was the same day she saved the man they couldn't. Kezia had already read the room before she even clocked in. 12 years of reading rooms far more dangerous than a hospital corridor. Rooms where reading wrong meant not walking out had made it second nature. She saw the tilt of Dr. Faulkner's chin when the charge nurse introduced her. She saw the way Nurse Tatum— no, not Tatum. That name was someone else's. This was a different hallway. A different life. The way Nurse Elspeth Graves turned back to her computer a half-second too soon, like the introduction wasn't worth finishing. She saw the junior resident, a tall man whose badge read Dr. Coppard, whisper something to the woman beside him that made them both smile at their shoes. None of it landed the way they probably hoped it would. Sinclair just picked up her clipboard. Her full name was Maeve Sinclair, and she had been a lot of things before she became a ward nurse at Victoria General Hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She had been a daughter in Antigonish who learned to gut fish at 8 and fix engines at 10. She had been a student who graduated top of her nursing cohort at Dalhousie, and then, in a decision that baffled her mother for years, signed the papers that sent her somewhere else entirely. She had been a naval medical assistant with the Royal Canadian Navy, then an advanced trauma life support instructor, then the primary medic attached to Joint Task Force 2 on 3 rotations she was not permitted to discuss in detail, and she had been the person, on one specific night outside a town, whose name she kept only in a sealed part of herself, who had kept 4 men breathing long enough for the helicopter to arrive. She was 34 now. She had a badge that said RN and a locker that held spare compression bandages she'd bought herself, and she made very little noise about any of the rest of it. This was, she had found, the part people struggled with. Her first week at Victoria General was quiet in the way a compressed spring is quiet. Potential in every coil. The emergency department ran on a hierarchy that wasn't written anywhere, but was understood by everyone. Faulkner was the attending who commanded the room. He was good, genuinely good, quick hands, solid diagnostic instincts, and the kind of voice that people followed in a crisis. Sinclair had no argument with any of that. What she noticed was the way he filled the space between good and excellent, with the assumption that he was already there. That gap in her experience was where people died. The nursing staff were competent. Graves managed triage with efficiency, if not warmth. A nurse named Dorset, Petra Dorset, early 30s, clearly had been there long enough to have opinions, made a point of explaining things to Sinclair that Sinclair already knew. But she did it without cruelty, so Sinclair listened politely and nodded in the right places. The person who gave her the most trouble was the least powerful person in the room. Dr. Coppard, the resident, who had apparently decided that Sinclair's quietness was evidence of something. He made small corrections. He repeated instructions she hadn't asked for. Once, when she was prepping an IV line, with an efficiency she'd learned in field conditions, with no stable surface, and someone yelling in her ear, he leaned over and said, with the patient condescension of a man who has never had anyone push back, "You might want to watch the angle on that." She adjusted the angle by 0.5 millimeter just to end the conversation. "Thanks," she said. He looked slightly disappointed that she hadn't been wrong. The story of what happened in the ER that Thursday in November starts the way most real stories start, not with a bang, but with a phone ringing at the wrong time. Sinclair was in the break room eating half a sandwich at 6:47 in the morning, 17 minutes before her shift was supposed to end, when the radio traffic from the ambulance bay changed pitch. She heard it through the wall. 12 years of listening to the particular frequency of urgency, not the routine urgency of a busy ER, but the specific register of something worse than expected. And she was on her feet before the overhead announcement came through. She pushed the break room door open. The information moved fast. 2 ambulances incoming, 1 trauma van, injuries from an explosion at CFB Shearwater across the harbor. Training exercise. Something had gone wrong with the demolition simulation. 3 injured, 1 critical. Faulkner took the room. His voice was good in these moments. She gave him that genuinely. He started assigning roles before the doors opened. Coppered on the second patient, Sinclair. Faulkner looked at her for approximately 1 second. Vitals monitoring on Bay. Don't let it get cluttered. Bay 3 was the lightest of the 3 incoming. She understood the logic. She was new, she was unknown, and this was not the moment to test unknowns. Understood, she said. The ambulance doors opened at 7:02 a.m. The critical patient came in first. Male, late 20s, military fit, blast injury to the right side. Shrapnel patterning that Sinclair clocked from 10 feet away as consistent with a shaped charge at close range. He was conscious but fading, blood pressure dropping in real time, a field tourniquet applied above the right knee that was doing its job, but only just. The medic who came in with him, civilian paramedic, young, shaken, was reciting vitals in a voice a half note too high. Faulkner moved in. Coppard flanked him. 2 nurses Sinclair didn't know well closed the gap. Sinclair went to Bay 3. Her patient was a man named, according to his dog tags, which she noted out of habit, Master Corporal Thibault, 41. Blast concussion, secondary laceration to the left forearm, stable but rattled. He was awake, tracking, answering questions. She ran her assessment, fast and clean, and told him in a level voice that he was going to be fine. He looked at her for a moment with the particular look of a military person recognizing something in another military person. UCF? He asked. The abbreviation for Canadian Forces, informal. Not anymore, she said. He nodded like that, answered more than she'd said. She was finishing her documentation on Thibault when she heard the change in Bay 1. Not a shout, not an alarm. The alarms were already going. It was a specific silence inside the noise, the kind that happens when the people managing a situation hit the edge of what they know and have to stop and recalculate. Sinclair had heard that silence in a vehicle outside Kandahar. She had heard it in a mountainside, in conditions she didn't have words for in polite company. She had never heard it in a hospital before, but the sound was identical. She turned. Faulkner's voice had changed register. Still controlled, but with a tightness underneath. The critical patient, whose name she didn't know yet, whose name she would learn later, had developed a tension pneumothorax, right lung. The blast trauma had done what blast trauma does when you're unlucky and the physics cooperate. The chest was filling. The trachea was beginning to deviate. His blood pressure, which had been dropping, was now in freefall. She watched Faulkner reach for the chest tube kit. She watched Coppard prepare the thoracotomy tray. She watched the clock on the wall above Bay 1, which said 7:19 a.m., and she did the math that her body had been trained to do without her conscious permission. The window was narrowing. What she did next was not. She would acknowledge later, strictly within her defined scope, as a ward nurse on her second week at Victoria General. She knew that going in. She walked toward Bay 1 anyway, because the alternative was standing in Bay 3, watching a man die of something she knew how to fix. Faulkner. He looked up. The look on his face was not hostile. He didn't have time for hostile, but it was not welcoming. Sinclair, I need you in Bay 3. Tension pneumo, right side. You need a needle decompression before the tube. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. If you go straight to the tube right now, you'll lose him before you get the lung reinflated. Silence. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But in a room running on adrenaline, 2 seconds feels geological. I'm the attending physician, Faulkner said. Yes, she said, and I've done this procedure 11 times in conditions without power or sterile field or a tray of instruments. I'm telling you the diagnosis. The call is yours. Another second. She watched him look at the patient. She watched him look at the deviation she'd described. She watched something move across his face that she recognized because she'd felt it herself once, in a dark hallway a very long time ago, the moment when you put what you know above what you feel. Needle decompression, he said. Go. She had the 14-gauge angiocath placed in 40 seconds. The rush of air was audible. The blood pressure began climbing at 721. By 723, the trachea had straightened. By 726, when Faulkner completed the chest tube insertion that would have been premature 2 minutes earlier, the patient was stable enough to hold. No one said anything to her directly. The room just kept moving, the way rooms do when the crisis is past and everyone is processing what just happened, while pretending to still be fully focused on what's in front of them. Coppard glanced at her once. She couldn't read the expression and didn't try. Graves, standing at the monitor, met her eyes for just a moment and gave a nod so small it was almost nothing. Sinclair went back to Bay 3, checked Thibault's pressure, updated his chart, and finished her sandwich at 7:41 when the department had settled to a manageable roar. The debrief happened informally, which is how most real debriefs happen. Faulkner found her at the nursing station at 8:15, which was technically 45 minutes after her shift had ended. She was still there because leaving felt abrupt, and because Thibault had asked her a question about post-concussion protocols that deserved a real answer. Sinclair. Faulkner stood in a way that suggested he'd thought about what to say and hadn't arrived at a perfect version. That was a correct call. Thank you, she said. It was also outside your scope. Also correct, she said. He studied her for a moment. He was the kind of man who was accustomed to rooms he could read, and she understood, difficult for him to read. Do you want to tell me where you learned to do that? She considered the question the way she always considered it, the version she was allowed to give versus the version that was accurate. I spent 8 years attached to naval medical units, she said. The last 3 in a support role for special operations. I've managed trauma in environments where the chest tube kit was a luxury. Faulkner said nothing for a moment. Joint Task Force, he said. She didn't confirm or deny. She didn't have to. The answer was in the fact that she didn't deny it. He nodded slowly. You should have told us at intake. Would it have changed my Bay assignment this morning? Another pause, slightly longer. Probably not, he said to his credit. Then it didn't matter yet, she said. Now it does. Now you know. The man she'd helped stabilize. She learned his name at 9:30 when the unit's medical liaison arrived. Was Petty Officer 2nd Class Darren Solberg, 26 years old, from Thunder Bay, Ontario. The explosion that injured him and the 2 others had been caused by a miscommunication in the exercise timeline. Details that weren't hers to know and that she didn't ask for. What she did know, because the liaison told her without being asked, was that Solberg had a wife who was 6 months pregnant in Thunder Bay. She filed that away in the part of herself that kept track of outcomes. The hospital at 10:45 a.m. was a different animal than the hospital at 7 Gly. The morning crisis had metabolized into paperwork and consults, and the ordinary business of being unwell in a managed facility. Sinclair was technically off duty, but still in the department, updating her own notes in the way she'd learned from years of working in systems where incomplete documentation could follow you into situations you didn't want them following you into. She was not prepared. No one was. For what came through the ambulance bay entrance at 10:52. Not an emergency. Not a gurney. 6 people in Canadian Armed Forces uniforms, dress whites, moving with the coordinated precision of people who have spent so much time moving together that it has become involuntary. At the front of the group, a man Sinclair recognized, not by face but by rank insignia, and the particular way he held space. Chief Petty Officer First Class, Royal Canadian Navy, the kind of rank that takes 20 years minimum to reach and can't be faked, came to a stop in the middle of the emergency department. Behind him, 2 of the others were carrying something, a set of dress items folded with the precision of ceremony. The department, which had been making the ordinary noise of a busy morning, went quiet. Sinclair was not a person who lost her composure easily. There was a specific event on a specific night that had used up what she thought of as her lifetime supply of being caught off guard. She had not, since that night, been truly surprised by anything. She was surprised now, not by what was happening. She understood, on some level, before it fully resolved, but by the feeling of it. By the fact that her hands, which had been steady at 7:19 when a man's lung was collapsing, were not entirely steady now. The Chief Petty Officer, whose name, she would learn, was CPO-1 Reinhold? No, not Reinhold. Reinhold was a name from a list she'd memorized for another purpose. Whose name was CPO-1 Galloway, stopped 3 feet from her. His expression was formal in the way that military formality conceals a great deal. "Maeve Sinclair?" he said. She straightened without deciding to. "Yes." On behalf of the commanding officer of Maritime Forces Atlantic and the crew of the training unit operating out of CFB Shearwater this morning, he said, in a voice trained to carry without shouting, "We are here to acknowledge the actions you took at 7:19 a.m. today." She heard someone behind her make a sound. She didn't turn to see who. "Petty Officer Solberg is stable," Galloway continued. "His wife has been notified. He wanted me to give you a message." He reached into his jacket. He produced a folded piece of paper, handwritten. She could see from the weight of it, and held it out. She took it. Her hands were entirely steady again. "He said," Galloway continued, setting aside the paper for a moment and speaking from memory, because clearly this was not a man who read things off a sheet when he could help it, that the person who kept him breathing this morning moved like she'd done it before. He said he wanted her to know that his daughter is going to have a father because of that. The department was absolutely silent. Sinclair looked at the piece of paper in her hand. She didn't open it. Not here. That was for later, for the car, for the quiet that she knew how to inhabit. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was what she needed it to be. Galloway turned then and did the thing she had not anticipated, the thing that several people in that emergency department would think about for a long time afterward. He came to attention, not a casual acknowledgement, the full military posture, heels together, chin level, the kind of stance that in the Canadian Armed Forces is reserved for specific moments and specific people, and does not come cheap from someone who wears a chief petty officer's insignia. The 5 people behind him followed. 6 people in dress whites, at attention, in the middle of Victoria General's emergency department, for a woman in nursing scrubs, holding a folded piece of paper. Sinclair returned it the way she'd been trained to return it. Not the civilian nod, but the real thing. Posture and acknowledgement and the understanding between military people that some moments require their own language. Then Galloway relaxed and the moment was over, and the department slowly began making noise again. Faulkner was the first person to speak to her afterward, and she would credit him for this, because it would have been easy not to. 8 years, he said, and 3 attached to special operations. Give or take, she said. He looked at her with an expression she had seen on the faces of good doctors when they have been genuinely surprised. Not embarrassed, which would have been worse, but recalibrating, updating information, adjusting to an accurate picture. I should have asked more questions at intake, he said. I should have offered more answers, she said. This was also true. She had always defaulted to letting competence speak first, which in a civilian institution meant starting behind. That's on both of us then, Faulkner said. It was, she thought, a fair assessment. Coppard found her at the locker room exit at noon. She'd been expecting this, or something like it. He was young enough that the encounter cost him something, which was how she could tell he was going to be good eventually. I owe you an apology, he said. He looked like someone who had prepared several versions of this sentence and had gone with the shortest. For the IV line comment, she said. He had the grace to look slightly pained. Among other things, Doctor. Coppard, she said, and she thought about how to say the next part in a way that was honest without being weaponized, because she had known people who wielded their past as a cudgel, and she had promised herself she would never do it. The reason I didn't explain my background isn't that I was hiding it. It's that I've learned that what you can do matters more than what you've done. I didn't need you to trust my history. I needed you to trust the IV line. He thought about that. And if the situation hadn't, then I would have found another moment, she said. Competence finds them. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the something else wasn't ready yet, and she respected him for not saying it before it was. Thank you, he said instead. She pushed the locker room door open. Ask better questions at intake, she said, not unkindly, of everyone. It matters. She drove home to Dartmouth across the McDonald Bridge at 12:30 in weather that hadn't decided between rain and not rain, the harbor gray-green beneath her, the kind of November that Nova Scotia specializes in. Not cruel exactly, but honest, undecorative. She sat in her car in her driveway for a few minutes before going in. She opened the folded piece of paper. Petty Officer Solberg's handwriting was large and slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone who had written it quickly and meant every word. I don't know your name yet, but the liaison is going to give you this. My wife is Colleen. The baby is a girl. We're going to call her Frances. I want you to know that if there's anything I can ever do, if there's ever anything, please. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. Darren Solberg, BO2, and soon. Dad Sinclair folded the paper back on its creases with the same care she had learned to use with things that mattered. She put it in the glove compartment, which was where she kept things she needed to keep. She sat for another moment. Outside, the rain made up its mind. She went inside. She was back at Victoria General the next morning at 6:45, 15 minutes early, with a coffee she'd made at home, because the break room coffee was genuinely terrible and life was too short. She signed in, picked up her assignment board, and walked into the department. Graves looked up from triage. The nod she gave this morning was not the almost invisible one from yesterday. It was a full nod, the kind that means something. "Morning, Sinclair," she said. "Morning," Sinclair said. She put her bag in her locker, compression bandages still there. Alongside a small trauma shears she'd had since Petawawa, and clipped her badge to her scrubs, and walked out into the department, which was already in motion, already in the ordinary beautiful chaos of people trying to keep other people alive. She had been a lot of things before this. Right now, she was exactly where she was supposed to be.